For the gospel reading today, I've chosen the passages from John's Gospel, excerpts from chapter 14, which was Christ's final teaching at the Last Supper to the disciples. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? Jesus answered, I am the way, and the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Philip said, Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. Jesus answered, don't you know me, Philip, even after I've been with you for such a long time? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and that the Father is in me? The words I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing his work. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. Or at least believe on the evidence of the works themselves. Very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works that I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father. And I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. You may ask me for anything in my name, and I will do it. If you love me, keep my commands. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to help you and to be with you forever, the Spirit of truth. The world cannot accept him because it neither sees him nor knows him. But you know him, for he lives with you and will be in you. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Before long, the world will not see me anymore, but you will see me. Because I live, you also will live. On that day, you will realize that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. These are words inspired by God. So as you know by now, I typically take a theme for a month, and I develop it, typically for the first 2 Sundays of the month, and then on the third Sunday, I do a recap and a Q&A. But I began last Sunday because it was the 5th Sunday in June, and I wanted to develop a theme over 3 weeks. Last Sunday, June the 30th, and today, 7/7, and next Sunday, 7/14. So I'm developing this particular theme, and then on July 21st, I'll do a recap and a Q&A. As I mentioned, the 3 great loves of my life have been science, psychology, and spirituality. And so in this theme, I'll weave these 3 topics together. And the generic title I've given to the theme, I called it Walking and Talking with God. So last Sunday, I looked at the science of life. And today I want to look at the psychology of life. And I'm going to make 4 main points, basically, when I talk about the psychology of life. The first one, I want to deal with the concept of what Stanislav Grof called perinatal matrices, and I'll explain that as I get into it. The second point I want to make is I want to talk about the balance between the male and the female. The third point, I want to talk about cosmic fractals. And then the fourth point, I'll call it time-lapsed theology. So there's where I'm hoping to head today, God willing. Perinatal matrices was a concept that Stanislav Grof, who was a very famous Czech psychiatrist who worked actually in America and still lives in America at this stage. And perinatal just literally means around the birthing time, before the birth, during the birth, and shortly after the birth. And Stan Grof, by working with thousands of clients, came to the conclusion that there are 4 great stages to the perinatal period of our life. Before we're born, as we're being born, and after we're born. And so he broke them into what he called the 4 perinatal matrices. So the first one is the womb experience itself. And it can be either a good experience or a bad experience being in the mother's womb, depending on what's happening to the mother. Is she on drugs? Is she subject to violence? Is she taking care of herself? Is she in a loving relationship? So for the baby in utero, the womb experience can be either a good experience or a bad experience. So that's the first stage. The second stage is once the contractions begin. And now it's really problematic for the child because the cervix is still closed, but the walls are coming in, the roof is coming down, and the floor is coming up, and the child is being squeezed, and there's no way out as far as the child can see. So that's stage 2, perinatal matrix, stage 2. The third one is that the cervix is now opened, but the child is in the birth canal, desperately trying to work his way through the birth canal and be born. So it's a titanic struggle to exit. And then the fourth matrix, he called it, it's the birth itself. So now the child is out, the cord is cut, there's bright lights, there's noisy, and it's cold. Now, what he found out in his psychological practice is that difficulties at any stage of this process, at any one of these matrices, seem to correlate very closely with specific forms of adult neurosis. So depending on which stage was most difficult for the child during the birth, the perinatal period, then there'll be a specific kind of adult neurotic behavior that goes along with it. So let me give you a few examples. So let's take the first stage, the good womb, bad womb experience. So if the mother is releasing lots of stress hormones, then this will create anxiety in the child in utero. Whereas if the mother is secreting nurturing hormones, this is going to create really pleasant experiences in the child. And subsequently, the adult person will have the same, anxiety levels or pleasant feelings, depending what the in utero experience was. The second stage of the birthing process then is where the contractions have begun, but the cervix is still closed. And this obviously can be a really scary experience. And people in later life who are traumatized at this point, they may have problems with claustrophobia or some kind of an existential angst or depression or feelings of terror or negative consequences of present choices. So somebody who has been traumatized during that particular stage, they're the kind of adult neurotic behaviors that the person is likely to demonstrate. If the cervix is open, and the child is in the birth canal and struggling furiously to get out. Now, this can be both a thrilling and also a kind of violent or a dangerous stage because, for instance, the umbilical cord might be around the child's neck. That actually happened to my youngest brother, Porrick, when he was born. He was a blue baby because the umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck. And so even though we were in the birth canal, and it seems like freedom, I'm about to become free, it can still be very, very, very dangerous. Now, so people who get fixated at this point in their birth may grow up to be thrill seekers, but also they can be very dangerous individuals. And the final stage then, the final perinatal matrix is the after birth itself. Now I've left the womb, I'm outside in the world for the first time. And this may be associated in later life with feelings of great expansion. You're feeling totally free. But it also can lead to feelings of agoraphobia, a fear of open spaces. It can be also kind of feelings of rebirth, so a religious experience, but it can be feelings also of separation and loneliness because now I'm separated from the mother. So what he found out was that there are these very, very interesting correlations between the stages of being born, and subsequent neurotic behavior in adults. Now, I believe that these perinatal matrices are not just true, at the level of the individual person who's experiencing in utero and birth. I think there are perinatal matrices associated at the cultural level itself and even at the species level of Homo sapiens sapiens. So I would say, for instance, that culture is a womb subject to the same four perinatal matrices. When you grow up in any culture, you're going to experience the same kind of perinatal matrices, in the culture that you experience in utero. So in some senses, I think right now humanity is at a perinatal situation as a human species. The question is, to what are we going to give birth? Is it going to be a stillbirth or is it going to be a bouncing baby? So it depends very, very much on how we handle this birthing process in which we're engaged right now as a human family. Now, all great cultures experience both expansion and contraction. I spoke about this last week when I talked about the science of life. Now, the cultures expand and they contract. There's always a beginning and an end to all the empires of the world, like Rome. Now, when you look historically, this can happen for many, many different reasons. And basically, there are two kinds of reasons. There are internal reasons why an empire collapses or a culture collapses, and there are external reasons why a culture or an empire collapses. So what are some of the internal reasons? What are some of the internal reasons why cultures collapse or even empires collapse? And I would say the following: the moral corruption of all the institutions. This happens again and again and again when you read history, that the first stage is some kind of a moral corruption of all the institutions of government. In fact, they can be religious institutions, they can be political institutions, they can be economic institutions, it can be the media, or it can be a breakdown of the family system, or it can be sexual perversion in society. And very, very often it leads to the feminization of males in society. And most devastating of the lot is the loss of real spirituality. This is always the death knell, the internal death knell that kind of causes the collapse of a culture or of an empire. The loss of real spirituality, the substitution of corrupt religious belief systems instead. So there's some of the internal reasons why cultures collapse and why empires collapse. There are also external reasons. So, for instance, when you look at all of the great collapses, cultural collapses throughout human history, it goes in the following order very often. The first part is some kind of a climate swing. You're going from an ice age to desertification. And the climate leads to famines of various kinds. And the famines lead to migrations. And then the migrating groups, there's war over land and over resources. And then there's colonization that happens, and it can be cultural or economic or military. So there will be some of the external reasons why cultures and empires collapse. Now, you can understand this theoretically, if you even have a peremptory knowledge of human history. But much more importantly, you can experience it personally by looking right now at the disintegration of our own country and our own world right now. It's happening as we speak. So then the question, as we're so close to our own independence just a few days ago, the question for me then is, using these four perinatal matrices, number one, is the USA a nurturing womb or a toxic womb right now? As we live in this country and celebrate 248 years of independence, is it a nurturing womb right now, or is it a toxic womb right now? If I look at the second stage of the perinatal matrix, is the cultural cervix still closed so that our birthing into some new form of community is being utterly thwarted? So are we living in a womb in which there are contractions happening, but the cervix is still closed? And if so, what does this look like to you? And how do you feel about it? And much more importantly, what are you going to do about it? So that's the second matrix. The third perinatal matrix then, when you look at our culture, is the cultural cervix beginning to open? And are we, the people, willing to engage with the struggle? Because it is a struggle, and it will be even a more difficult struggle going forward over the next few years. So if the opening is there, if the cervix is open, are we, the people, prepared to do the birthing and the struggle involved in it? Are the doulas and the midwives and the doctors whose job it is to assist the birth of a healthy baby, are they really helping the mother? Or is there some kind of a global oligarchy attempting a late-term abortion of this baby? And then finally, the fourth matrix. Has the mother, and the mother is we the people, has the mother been trained, and are we being encouraged to work with contractions, or are we simply ignoring them? So that's the first point I want to make. I want to talk then about the balance of the male and the female. I would say that the union of the sperm and the egg is the quintessential archetype of the male-female dance. And in fact, it's a fractal of the cosmos, all the ways up and all the way down. So for the female part of this dance, the female is going to grow the embryo and the fetus inside her for 9 months. And then she's going to do most of the caretaking of the baby and the child. And the function of the male is to be the protector of the protectress and to be the provider for both the mother and for the child. But here's the problem in our modern society. The problem is that we now have most small kids being raised by nannies and most teenagers being raised by peers and by electronic screens. Because both parents either choose or are being forced by economic circumstances to work outside the home. So we're birthing the next generation of kids into this kind of an atmosphere. Now, vilifying or devaluing either the male or the female is a recipe for social collapse. And so we watched a period where the feminine had been suppressed by a patriarchy for a long, long period of time. That was a huge problem. Now we're swinging the other way, it seems to me, and the demonization of the masculine, phrases like toxic masculinity, which I find really abusive. Demonizing the masculine is currently a huge problem. So suppressing the feminine or demonizing the masculine is not going to birth the kind of baby and nurture the kind of baby that we want to see in our world for the rest of this century. That's my second point. Thirdly, then I want to talk about what I call cosmic fractals. I believe that the reincarnation of the individual soul is a fractal of the reincarnation of the species soul, all the ways up the cosmic ladder. So it's not just that we as individuals reincarnate, but that the species itself, there's a species soul that reincarnates again and again and again. And therefore, there's a kind of a collective karma. And I've said to you many times that I do not believe that karma is a punitive mechanism whereby we're punished in subsequent lifetimes for mistakes we made in previous lifetimes. Rather, karma is simply the law of cause and effect. But there's not just an individual karma. It's not just that my individual actions create consequences, but that there's a collective karma. That the family has a collective karma qua family. That the culture has a collective karma qua culture. That the nation has a collective karma qua nation. That great religions have collective karma as religions. That the species itself has a kind of a collective karma. I believe, in fact, that planet Earth, with all its life forms, also has a collective karma. I believe that our solar system and its planets has a collective karma. I believe that the galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, has a collective karma. And ultimately, I believe that the very cosmos itself has a collective karma. In other words, it's dealing with the consequences of previous decisions at every one of these levels. If you look at the human body as a kind of an example or a metaphor, it's like the health of a single cell is contributing to and depending upon the health of the entire organism. So if any single cell gets out of whack, it creates a kind of a cancerous growth. So it affects the health of the entire organism, and it's also dependent upon the health of the entire organism. And that's where I see reincarnation, that, the health of an individual person contributes to and is dependent upon the health of the collective, the entire species in this case. So all of the species, for instance, I believe, every species is like a single cell on the body of Gaia. And Gaia herself is a single cell in our solar system. And our solar system is a single cell of the Milky Way galaxy. And this galaxy is a single cell in the cosmos itself. And therefore, it's karma, both the light and the dark versions of karma, is karma all the ways up and all the ways back down. So I believe very strongly that groups have reincarnated throughout history. And they've reincarnated as groups for two reasons, it seems to me. The first one is to deal with the karma that we have created in our past incarnations as a collective. So now we're back as a collective in order to deal with the karma we've generated in previous epochs, good and bad stuff. And the second reason that we reincarnate as groups is in order to create a blueprint for the future of the group. So there's a group of us, incarnating right now as citizens of the United States of America in order to kind of deal with the karma that we've generated over the last 248 years and to create a blueprint for the next 248 years. The same thing is true of the human species. We're dealing with the karma we've created as a human family in past incarnations, and we're trying to create a blueprint for the future of the family. I came across a great quote in a book I'm reading at the moment by a guy called Chris Bash, where he said, the cultural gains we have made around slavery and racism and gender discrimination and speciesism were a healing effort by the previous incarnations which instituted them. So previous generations created slavery, and it created racism, and it created gender discrimination and speciesism against nature. And now we're all back in order to try to undo slavery and undo racism and undo gender discrimination and undo speciesism. That is our function as a group. We're not just here to kind of get out of earth alive and save our souls and get to heaven. We're here as a group in order to kind of undo the bad karma of the past, build upon the good karma of the past, and create a blueprint for our future as a species. It's my third point. And the last point is this. I call it time-lapsed theology. Imagine that every single day of your life, from the day you were born, that somebody took a photograph of you. So they took a photograph of you every single day. That's 365 days, every year for 80 years. You've got a photograph for every single day. So that's, 365 multiplied by 80. Now, suppose you put those photographs on a reel and you play it at 25 frames per second. You could reduce your entire lifespan to 1,168 seconds, which is around 20 minutes. So you could see your entire life shrunk down to a 20-minute period, and it will give you a great sense of the flow of your life. Now, this would show you then the entire trajectory and evolution of your life. The problem with this is that we see stuff in slow motion. We only see it an hour by an hour, and a day by a day, and a week by a week, and a month by a month, and a year by a year. And suddenly 80 years have gone by, and we really haven't seen the kind of the consequential flow and the reasons that we are who we are. And we like trying to watch grass grow. So that's the first problem we have, that we tend to see stuff in slow motion. We see our entire life in slow motion, and it becomes very difficult for us to begin to understand why the choice we made led to the consequences we experienced. That's the first problem with it. And the second problem is that for most people, they don't factor in reincarnation. So they believe that life begins at birth and it ends at death. And all of the growing and all of the healing and all the mistakes have to be made within that period. And that's not true. You've been here millions and millions of times and will come back again and again. And so having the long-term viewpoint becomes really important. And it's very important as well. The third problem I see is that we're stuck in what I call the 7 timelines. There are 2 timelines of the past, 2 timelines of the present, and 3 timelines of the future. So what do I mean by that? 2 timelines of the past. There's an actual historical past of which you are a product. Things that really happened in our world going back centuries, and you're a product of that. But also you're a product of the history that was written by the winners, because that's what you were fed. And therefore you're a product of the fictitious past, which was written by the victors, as well as the real past that actually affected who you are. So now you're the product of 2 kinds of past. Moreover, you're the product of 2 kinds of present. There's stuff that's actually happening in our world right now, all over the world right now, and we're products of that. And then we're products of the propaganda that want to tell us what's happening and why what's happening is happening. And we're both, we're products of both the fictitious present and the kind of the actual present. And then we're products of three kinds of future. The first future is people who believe that we live in a pre-programmed future. We have no control. There is no free will whatsoever. We're living a program and it would unfold no matter what we do. Now, personally, I do not believe in that one at all. I believe that there are two other forms of the future. The first one is the probable future. What's likely to happen if we keep doing what we're doing? And then there's the possible future, which is the future we could create if we started doing things differently. So that's how I see us moving through this timeline. I want to imagine now for a moment. Imagine you could take a single photograph of each one of your incarnations, just a single photograph from one incarnation, and then the next photograph from the next incarnation. And the universe right now is about 13.6 billion years of age. So that's how old your soul is. Now imagine that your soul incarnated even just once every 1,000 years. That would give you 13.6 million incarnations. Now, if you would take a photograph of each of these incarnations and put it on a spool and play it at 25 frames per second, it would take you just 151 hours to play the entirety of your incarnational cycles, less than 1 week's time. And this would show you the entire trajectory and evolution of your entire soul during its 3D incarnations. So finally, I want to end by saying, I believe that there are actually two versions of now. The first version is a kind of a fleeting present, which can only be experienced in the rearview mirror of a fleeting Planck time. A Planck time is 10 to the power of minus 43 seconds. It's the shortest possible measurement of time according to quantum mechanics. Now, what it tells us is that, the present actually is a mirage, because before you can become aware of the present, it's already gone, long gone before you're actually experiencing it. So one version of the now is that you're living in this, I call it a fleeting present, which can actually only be seen in the rear view mirror of a fleeting Planck time constant. But I believe there's an eternal present. And for me, the eternal present archives all of the actual past, as well as all of the possible futures. And that is our mission at this stage. It is to learn to live in the eternal now. The eternal now is the most creative and the most healing gift we can offer to our times, to our species, and to our planet. Namaste, my brothers and sisters.